change.
How far are you willing to go? The LEAP Manifesto suggests end of fossil fuels, leave them in the ground, don't pull them out. Are you willing to go that far?
That's why it's going to be a tremendous debate at our convention
But
in
what
Edmonton
about you?
on the weekend. Well, I do have a track record.
On the acting front, would you go that far?
I'm going to be at the debate, and I'm not going to now decide what the result of that debate should be.
Tom Mulcair wouldn't say exactly how he felt about the so-called LEAP Manifesto. The manifesto calls for dramatic action on climate change, urging a transition away from fossil fuels and rejecting new pipelines. We're back with round 2 of the Sunday Scrum, and this part is where we'll discuss the future direction of the New Democratic Party. The CBC's Chris Hall is standing by in Edmonton and in Ottawa. Susan Riley and Katie O'Malley. All right, so Chris, are we going to hear from Tom Mulcair after they vote on that LEAP Manifesto, which I believe is about an hour from now, and then his speech? I mean, surely he's going to have to say whether or not he believes in this, right?
Well, you know, you'd think that he'd have to say more than he has so far, both in all the interviews he's been doing this week. But look, I want to go back again. I don't want to keep going back to Rachel Notley, but she gave this performance yesterday where she had all of her cabinet ministers, all of her caucus, and all of the Alberta delegates stand up in this hall before she talked about the importance of having an NDP government in power, which needs oil revenues. So she put a pretty firm statement out there that this is not something that Alberta delegates will stand for, and they are clearly quite a large number of them, almost 400 apparently. So imagine if that manifesto is adopted and it includes very strong statements of support from the floor to have no more pipelines built. I think that's a very divisive issue for them. So will Tom Mulcair, to get to your question, Andrew, will he talk about it? I think he's going to have to. I think he's going to say that it's a broad aspirational goal, the manifesto. It's not policy. They will take their time to study it, and come 2018, when they meet again to discuss policy, they'll have some recommendations. But I would be very surprised if he comes out and says anything in an endorsement of that pipeline piece of it.
Katie?
I think what Chris brings up a really good point, which is this particular convention has a very, very high presence of Alberta delegates, possibly more than you've ever seen at a New Democrat convention before. And that the fact that they are in a province that is now governed by an NDP premier, that's definitely characterizing the tone of the discussion. What I wonder is if they were to, first of all, if they were to reject the LEAP motion that's been put forward, and or if Tom Mulcair was to kind of do what Chris says and kind of not directly say, okay, well, you've given me my marching orders, I know what I'm going to do now. I have to wonder how divisive that issue is outside of that convention hall amongst NDP supporters. Because I get the sense that a lot of the people who are, if you look at outside Alberta and outside that convention hall, I'm not sure if the LEAP Manifesto is quite as controversial amongst people that have been New Democrats for their whole lives or who vote New Democrats. So that's another factor that I think they have to take into consideration.
Susan?
Well, it probably won't happen. I mean, I think Mulcair, I think Stephen Lewis actually, ironically...
You don't think that, you think that once they vote on the LEAP Manifesto, it will not pass? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the resolution that they're discussing is a bit watery. It's basically saying let's discuss at a constituency level the principles contained within the LEAP document. And Stephen Lewis himself said, look, you know, some constituencies are not going to agree. Some provinces, i.e. Alberta, are not going to agree. But let's at least start the discussion. And that's a whole different thing from saying, let's adopt a party position which says no more pipelines. I think it's a missed opportunity for the NDP, quite frankly. I think they're desperately looking for a wedge with Justin Trudeau's sort of semi-lefty government. And Trudeau's been very disappointing on the environmental file so far. Not that he hasn't tried, but he's been very disappointing. I think if the NDP federally came out against future pipelines, there would be a hue and cry. But the truth is, exporting oil has continued to be exported from the tar sands via rail. It's not always as dangerous, depending on the constituency the oil is as claimed. Yes, Alberta has been hard hit, but I noticed that Calgary, oil is not the only industry in Alberta, and Calgary's unemployment level got improved a slight bit just within the last week or so, I think. So, you know, you're not cruel about the consequences, but you don't overstate them either. And you say, look, basically, if we build a $15 billion pipeline to the East Coast, that kind of investment just suggests continuing development in the oil sands instead of what we probably need, which is a moratorium on new developments. Let the ones that are there continue and play out their string. I think that would be an interesting policy, and it would probably win them support.
Chris, is it unusual for a leader to be asked a question the way Peter asked him, and for the leader to say, well, there's going to be a debate at the convention, and I don't want to presume what that debate will be. I'll let that debate kind of happen, and then maybe I'll let you know how I feel about it?
Well, you know, actually, he actually went on, Peter, with Tom Mulcair. And Tom Mulcair said, I will do what the members tell me to do, which was, I thought, really interesting, because one of the criticisms of Tom Mulcair is that he hasn't been necessarily the best listener as a political leader. So I don't think it was that unusual. I think he is bound to represent the party in whatever resolutions come forward. As Susan points out, this is watered down dramatically from what it was. And what's interesting to me is Avi Lewis will tell you this is not supposed to be a partisan document. He'd like all political parties, including the Liberals, to adopt it, but it's one of those things. It's not actually policy, it's broad ideals, and party here and any other party can cherry pick what they want. Trade deals, we're against those. Oil pipelines, against those or not. So it's not necessarily going to be, I think, as problematic for Tom Mulcair today, but for Katie's point, it is galvanizing, particularly young people who see climate change as the most pressing problem. They want to see something concrete, and the NDP has that opportunity to seize that agenda and to move with it.
And Katie, though,
and
you know,
old people.
oh, go right.
I was going to say it's also galvanizing for some old people who are, such as myself, who are concerned about climate change. When he said that to Peter Mansbridge, I thought that's followership. That's not leadership. That is completely the opposite as well of what Bernie Sanders is, you know, the kind of campaign he's running in the U.S. You can call it unrealistic, but it's bold. He's saying things that are not supposed to be said. And he's winning support.
And Katie, is it possibly problematic for Tom Mulcair to be the budget balancing, no more taxes campaigner in the 2015 campaign to potentially moving the party to the left? Is he the guy that can just do that, and are delegates going to believe that he can?
That is definitely going to be a hard sell, and that's probably the biggest challenge facing him, concrete challenge in the speech, beyond taking a position of some sort on pipelines, would be if the party does seem to want to go back to a more progressive, a more progressive take on these things, which, frankly, if you've heard the discussion coming from delegates at the mic and during the campaign debrief and in general, they do not seem to have been terribly thrilled with that balanced budget position. I don't get the sense that that had much support within the party at all. So in that sense, yeah, he does have a tougher crowd to sell himself as the agent of change on. I guess we'll see if he's able to do it.
Since we've been talking about Rachel Notley and that speech, maybe we should play a little bit, a clip from that speech. And I believe this is the clip where she does talk about pipelines. Let's have a listen.
We're not just talking about it. We're acting. We're really acting on the basis of a concrete plan that is actually being implemented. That is what you get to do when you move up from manifesto to the detailed, principled, practical plans you can really implement by winning an election.
Okay, so that was Rachel Notley, but at another point, she did talk about the importance of bringing oil to Tidewater. So, Chris, you mentioned that Stephen Lewis saying, well, maybe there could be a split between the federal NDP and the provincial NDP in Alberta if they continue to run into these difficulties. Can you see something like that happening?
Well, I think people do recognize that they are different parties, but it's not particularly, I'm not sure Stephen Lewis was being particularly helpful to anybody with that comment. But, you've actually hit at the real problem the NDP faces both here and right across the country. Do you want to govern? Or do you want to be that social conscience in the Commons or whatever legislature you represent? And increasingly, people want to see an NDP government. And part of Rachel Notley's appeal is we are an NDP government. We weren't supposed to ever win. We were wiped off the map here in 1993, but we're back. Don't mess with this formula. We are what really is the strongest now base for the NDP. And that's a lesson that these people are going to have to think about as they put their names to the ballot. It's not just should Tom Mulcair lead, but what is this party supposed to be come 2019 federally? Is it supposed to compete, or are they going to be happy to go back and raise these kinds of issues that Bernie Sanders is raising, and he hasn't won anything yet either?
Susan, your thoughts on that? Is this a party? Do you think the delegates want to govern, or do they want to maybe go back to the days where they were the moral conscience of the country?
Well, I'm not sure that's the choice, and I think I understand Chris's analysis, but I think it might underestimate the appetite for change in the country and also a changing demographic. I don't think the Leaf Manifesto is particularly radical. I think it's future-oriented. I personally think signing out of trade deals is rash and is never going to happen. But on this central question of getting off carbon, I think I think it's a policy for the future, and I bet you, I think it might have more support than people assume.
Okay, we're going to stop, and we're actually going to talk about...
The Liberals have that policy too.
What's that,
Right?
Chris?
They do. So
What?
The Liberals have that same policy of moving to a low-carbon economy, but they're in government, so they get to actually do that. And that's what was Rachel Notley's point. You have to be in government to do these things. You can't just talk about them.
All right.